Hello and welcome back to Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt once again. This is episode 7. Time moving right along, Matt. Certainly want to welcome everybody watching us on YouTube or listening to us out there on the podcast app of your choice, be it Apple, Spotify. Again, we're all over the place. So again, appreciate those watching and listening. And you know, Matt, before I know I got a little baseball feedback from last show I got to get to, and I know we're both real excited about tonight's topic. I'll let you talk about in here in just a second, but first, just your reaction to what now, about a month, a little over a month, 6 shows, a lot of positive feedback. The show kind of again expanding throughout. Just been a lot of fun. Just your thoughts.
Yeah, we definitely like to get the feedback because a lot of times, even tonight, some of the topics we're going to talk about have basically come from people who have asked us about them. But like you said, we did the baseball show last week, and we didn't realize the timing was going to be so good with this. And we had some good feedback from it, but then we had some things happen in the news, right? So I guess I'll just leave it to you to talk about a little bit of what happened after the show.
Well, really, Matt, throughout the show, we just talked baseball from top to bottom. And when we started talking Little League, we had mentioned that we certainly have a Little League show in mind that's coming up here, probably sooner rather than later. And I had kind of mentioned that for the most part, I really think baseball does it well at the Little League level. At the high school level, I feel like we do it pretty well, certainly could do it better. We talked about, trying to figure out ways to financially support the spring sports a little bit more. Maybe some rule changes would help exposure of our athletes, of our sport throughout our different areas. With the obstacles of the 5 o'clock start and a lot of the different things that are out there. My 2 major concerns, and maybe we didn't talk about this enough last week, probably at the junior high level. When a kid comes out of that 6th to 7th grade transition, a lot of schools in a lot of areas, I know here in Ohio, it's a club sport. It's not really financially supported. A lot of times your school's going to push track a little bit more than a baseball, softball type of sport. So junior high is a little bit empty. That's a money thing, a facilities thing. And then I talked a lot about, I feel like we've got to promote it more at the higher levels. And I know it's a tradition-based sport, and it's something that I just think there's got to be a little bit more urgency. I still think you could play the number of games you've played to keep some of that tradition factor, but I think you can marry it into more of a modern-day feel. If we could see, again, I don't want to get off topic right from the start, but I'm seeing like in 2021 where, again, it looks like football playoffs are going to expand here in Ohio and so forth. I just feel like baseball at every single level is missing the boat in terms of making every game matter as much as possible. And those are some of the things. So in summary, go back, listen or watch show episode 6 if you didn't get a chance to. Really enjoyed the feedback. I know from doing SVC Sports Talk for over a decade that a lot of times, Matt, what happens is you may not get the same following when you talk spring sports compared to some of the more major ones. But what I've always found, Matt, is it's some of the most passionate following, the people that really have some opinions. So I think looking at the feedback, most people seem to agree that promoting the game, financing the game, having a little bit more urgency and, learning how to protect that tradition while still becoming a little bit more appealing to the elite athlete. I think that's kind of where it goes. So again, thank you for that feedback. It's awesome to do these shows and then get a chance over the next several days to sit back and kind of message people, email people, and so forth. So thank you. So moving into tonight, Matt, on episode 7, I know this is something that we've really been focused on from the start. These particular topics just seem to make sense at this particular time. Why don't you tell people a little bit why now and why these particular topics?
Well, I think, Shayne, talking to some people we do just from time to time when we run into people we know, we get asked some things about coaching, obviously, just our opinions on certain topics or just a general conversation, a certain topic will come up. And I know when we started this show, we had talked about, these are some interesting topics. How are we going to fit them into a show? And then, to be honest with you, the idea for this show kind of came up again, watching the Last Dance. It ended the other night, I think. we said when we started this show, we were going to base some of our topics off what was going on in the world of sports, right? Who knew that the biggest thing going on in the world of sports was a documentary about something that happened 20 some years ago, but I think that when I watched that show, it was almost like a case study a little bit, and some coaching and some leadership things. And a few shows back, we talked a little bit about that, the leadership aspect. Tonight, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the coaching aspects, tying in some things we saw with The Last Dance here as it finished up this past weekend, but also some of these topics just come from over time. These things have come up, and I think there's going to be some interesting topics, some things you and I can bounce back and forth, and I think I hopefully, and again, what I would like to see happen is, and it started to, is some of these things we talk about spur some conversation from others. Hopefully we get some emails. Hey, you need to consider this. We've already had that happen a few times. We've had some coaches reach out to us, which I love, with their ideas on some things. And that's great. Hopefully at the end of the day, when we do this show, we hope we provoke some thought into some of these areas, because all we're really trying to do is improve coaching, improve leadership, right? So
absolutely.
I guess I'm going to start off, Shayne. The one thing I noticed, and I think it was pretty obvious as you watch The Last Dance, and it's going to lead me in my first topic I want to ask you about, is obviously Jordan was a ruthless competitor. I mean, you can see that, and the way he carried himself, the way he talks about it still to today, years and years later. There's no question he was a ruthless competitor. I mean, he either didn't like his opponent at times, or even if he did, he got himself to a place where he didn't like his opponent. That was his motivation, a part of his motivation. And I got to thinking, I've talked to, I had a coach tell me the other day, we were talking about, back in the 90s, and how maybe some of that competitiveness has maybe died off a little bit, whether it be, back then, maybe kids from opposing schools, maybe they weren't as friendly with each other. Maybe student sections were a little bit crazier, right? Maybe the whole spirit around the game was a little more confrontational. And it's not that way as much anymore. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. I guess, what's your opinion on, is it okay not to like your opponent? Or are we better now in a day and age where kids will hug on each other before the game and all this kind of stuff that you would have never seen years ago? What's it done to, in your opinion, what's it done, Shayne, to like the competitive atmosphere, I guess?
Well, I don't know if it's better or worse. I think it's different. Again, I guess that's kind of what you're asking. I think what happens is, in a time of social media, in a time of travel ball, and be it club volleyball or travel baseball, softball, or AAU basketball or club soccer or whatever it may be, these particular kids not only know of each other, they truly know each other as friends. They hang out. They do a lot of different things. I know when we were growing up, you didn't really know the kids you were playing against. Yeah, you kind of knew of them, but you only knew them as your opponent, right? If you really worked hard to be really good at football or basketball or volleyball or whatever it may be, you only kind of knew your opponent as just that, the opponent. And I think what happens is, as time has moved on, you certainly have some of these different relationships forming. Now, does that mean that competition is bad? I don't know. I also think back to my childhood, and I can remember the days of 3 friends coming over, and we're playing 2-on-2 out in the driveway, and we'll play best of 7, these 2 versus these 2. And then what do? We switch teams. So all of a sudden, someone's been your buddy for the last hour, now for the next hour is your enemy. You know what I'm saying? So it's one of those things of where, you all of a sudden start to treat each other differently. You all of a sudden, you were trying to hide or help out on a weakness of a certain teammate, where now you're trying to attack that particular weakness as the opponent. So again, I don't know. I do think sportsmanship for the most part is better now. I mean, as an adult, as a coach, as an educator, I'd like to think that's a positive thing. But yeah, has it hurt competition a little bit? I think our political correctness and some of the things we joked on previous shows, you know, in terms of student sections and crowds and different things. I think there's certain things that make administration nervous. I think certain things that were acceptable, or as we said, received clever 25 years ago, maybe not so much more today. So again, certainly different. Relationships certainly different. I don't know that. I mean, do you follow what I'm saying there in terms of when you thought back? Like I always joked, if someone played for Zane Trace back when I was in high school at Uniota, I didn't know I was allowed to like him.
Well, and I can guarantee if somebody transferred over there, you wouldn't be hugging up on them before a game.
No.
And I see that happen now. Now look, I mean, I think as adults, you know, we've tried to improve our schools and our society by less bullying, teaching kids to be nicer to each other.
Right.
But I think sports is the thing that still there's a place for the competitor, even at times maybe the competitor that's driven, like Jordan in this. I mean, did he cross some lines? Probably at times. At the same time, I think, you know, don't you feel like in sports, and I said this on another show I was doing here recently, that you have to flip a switch sometimes. I mean, when you play sports, you have to get yourself to a place that you wouldn't be in everyday life. You know, you got to get yourself to a place when you compete. Like my wife makes fun of football guys. Okay, we'll be watching a football game. My wife will make fun of these football guys when they get a sack and they're just going crazy. They're dancing. They've got some choreographed thing. They're beating on their chest, right? And she's like, man, these guys aren't right. And I'm like, they play a sport that's not right. They have to get themselves to a place. Can you imagine playing in the NFL, let's say, or any level of football as a defensive end? You can't be in a normal place to play that game for those couple hours. You know, and these guys that get to this place competitively, it's not like you're walking around the grocery store that way, or you're just hanging out in town that way. But when you compete, don't you feel like there's still a place for that person or that approach of getting yourself to a highly competitive, whatever motivates you? You know, I look back on the team I played on in high school that had success. You know, we got to a point where we just used whatever as a rallying cry. You know, we used whatever motivation. When I watched this show, it reminded me like that. Like someone will say something, and all of a sudden it just flipped a switch in Jordan, right? He's like, oh, I'll show Clyde Drexler who the best player in the world is. I'll show, you know, who Russell, he can't guard me, whoever it is. I can remember the team I played in high school. We got to a place where if these people, if they don't like you or they think you're one way, we just embraced it. You know, okay, that's fine, that's cool. You know, we'll just embrace that and use it as a rallying cry. I absolutely hated the Detroit Pistons. There was no bigger team I hated because I loved the Bulls growing up. Hated the Pistons, but in a way, that's what they did, didn't they? Like them or not, agree with them or not, they basically picked a rallying cry and they said, okay, you want to call us the bad boys? We'll just be the bad boys and we'll be that together. So I think there's a fine line, don't you think, Shayne, between competitiveness, and you mentioned it, competitiveness and sportsmanship.
Well, there certainly is, but I would even challenge to say, even as adults, even though we as we get older and older in our career, I'm the first to admit I'm a completely different person when I enter the ring of competition in terms of my focus and my drive and the different things. Like I know watching you on the sideline compared to just sitting around eating pizza with you and watching a TV show one night, you're a different person, aren't you? I mean, it's one of those things where even still today, even though it might be in a different way, you flip a switch. Your focus goes to a different level. Your competitive juices start to go. So I think that's I just think that's natural. I think that all great competitors, no matter what it is you do, I even know when I go to teach a lesson, you know, obviously I'm more comfortable now 20 years than I was 20 years ago doing it, but even through the comfort, you still have a certain focus and a certain thing that you want to accomplish in terms of getting up in front of the classroom and executing that particular lesson plan. So to me, when I think of those competitive juices compared to sportsmanship, I simply look at it as it goes back to episode number 2, and we talked about cheating. Don't you feel like a lot of times a great way to define competitiveness versus sportsmanship is cheating? It's one of those things of, are you doing things within the rules? Are you doing things ethically proper to compete, to try to do your very best to be successful and to help those around you being successful? Do you think a correlation to episode number 2 with our cheating discussion makes some sense there if you're trying to figure out what is that line?
I think so to an extent. And I think when it comes to like motivation, whatever you use for that, and I can't remember who said it, but somebody said false motivation is better than no motivation. Well, whatever you use to become motivated. And again, like when you look at this Last Dance, Jordan oftentimes used comparisons, right? Or somebody, a lot of times it was an individual thing toward an opponent. But I think in terms of that, what kept him inside the lines of sportsmanship was he still valued or honored the game. He was the first guy to shake hands after a game. You saw that when they lost. First guy to shake hands with Stockton and Malone after the press conference. What he used to motivate himself and what he might have said in his own locker room, he didn't take that to them. So I think that's where you can start crossing lines with sportsmanship. I think that even class acts like Tim Tebow, I think most people would say the guy's a class act. When you watched him play football, he flipped a switch. He was a different animal, And so to me, I think I still think there's a place for that, a place for the competitor. Coaching's a different thing, isn't it? Because sometimes coaching's way more cerebral. So sometimes it doesn't do you as much good to get those juices flowing as a coach. It causes you to maybe,
You're right.
I know this firsthand, act out of control or do something you wouldn't normally do, where sometimes as a player, that extra energy helps. So I think the motivation for coach and player sometimes can be a couple different things.
Well, I don't think there's any question. And I guess I would throw this at you. A lot of times if you are looking to define this whole, competitiveness versus sportsmanship and flipping the switch and motivating or whatever, I guess I would ask you about being politically correct. I mean, don't you think a lot of that has to do with this today? Do you think being judged the way you are sometimes as a coach, being judged the way you are as an athlete, that in some ways has hurt a little bit of the I don't know if I want to say competitive spirit, but it certainly is made it different. I feel this way about being politically correct. I think it's hurt competition in the sense of it makes people feel like that win or lose, you're going to get rewarded. I mean, it's one of those things, everybody gets a trophy, right? It's a situation of, I want to be very clear here, because as a coach, I've always felt very passionate about this. I have no problems with certain participation awards. Like, for example, I'll give you a great example. As a coach, I feel real passionate about a kid lettering a varsity sport, be it in baseball, basketball, volleyball, whatever. And I've always said, I've never been a big play this many quarters, play this many innings, play this many sets. I haven't really liked that, because I felt like it goes against the very fabric of what we're trying to teach, a team concept. 1 through 12, every kid has a great role. Correct. It's one of those, you may be a practice player, or you may be asked to play. You may be asked. I may ask you to come in and pinch run for us, to help us offensively in a particular inning, and then the rules may not allow me to put you back in or whatever. But that's your role. So to me, there are certain participation rules that I feel strongly about that I think are very, very important. But what I'm talking about is this concept of no matter what place we finish in, or no matter what the result is, you're going to get rewarded in some way. I think that's where it's hurt competition. And do you follow what I'm saying there, in terms of when we're talking about results-driven awards, when we start to award anybody and everybody, I think it starts to have people question, well, gosh, why would I work that hard when I can work this hard and get the same thing?
Yeah, I definitely see your point, and I like your point about the lettering. By the way, I never looked at it from that angle. That's something that I may have to consider, because you're right. I mean, we preach teams. So in all honesty, if you're doing your job, regardless of your playing time, I agree with that. In terms of the political correctness, I think one thing with that is, as adults, we've probably discouraged competitiveness a little bit in an effort to maybe clean things up. Like when I watched this show with the Bulls, this Last Dance, I caught myself at times. Jordan would say something, and I was like, "Oh man," almost kind of cringe, like, "Ugh, I don't know if he should have went there," And I honestly think, had I been watching that as a 19 or 20-year-old college player back in the mid '90s, I don't think that affected me at all. I'd have been like, "Yeah, right on," But I think you get a little bit older, maybe, and it changes you, or you just, because you're dealing with kids and you're trying to help them grow up and mature the right way, quote unquote, the right way, whatever that is, maybe we have discouraged a little bit of the toughness, I guess, that because that's what I don't want to sacrifice. I just don't want to sacrifice the toughness of our players, the competitive juices of our players. And so I think, again, it's a fine line a little bit, but
well, real quick, I'm not a parent, so I would ask you this a little bit. Like, it always concerns me when I get parents come in and say, well, so-and-so, they studied really hard on that test and they had an 86 and, they're used to getting A's, and, I thought they really had given the most incredible effort. We might be talking about 6th, 7th, 8th grader throughout my career here in teaching. And I'll think to myself, well, that's awesome that they did that. If that level was an 86, it kind of gives them a bar, doesn't it, in terms of what level they have to go to get an A. And I think sometimes this whole, like, I don't understand the wanting to run to a teacher, run to a coach, and asking for more. It's just like this. If we give out a batting title and one kid hits 420 and the other kid hits 418, well, the kid that hit 418 is a really good high school baseball player, right?
yeah,
But he didn't win the batting title. Maybe 420 is higher than 418. I don't know. Maybe got an extra bloop or whatever. My point is, it's okay. It's okay to have results, and it's okay to judge those results in terms of, hey, that's the best, that's pretty good, that's average, that's below average. And then you've got to be able to correlate, what did I put into that? Because the one thing I'll say, and all the times I've done the website svcsportzone.com, and I've covered high school and I've coached high school, and I've been a huge fan of sports, 9 chances out of 10, the people that put the most into it are the people that most likely will get the most results. Now, obviously, talent's going to play a big role in that, but I'm just saying that I think sometimes we fall short when we don't evaluate or give honest evaluation, I guess is maybe the term that's been escaping me here. The honest evaluation is where we can really help generate the proper competitive juice that's going to help student athletes be successful. Is that not right?
It's okay to have, and I said this on a previous show, it's okay to have a winner and a loser. It just is. And
right.
I think you should value the process. I think the process is crucial, but at the end of the day, you're going to have winners and you're going to have losers, and it's just the nature of the game. So, another thing that jumped out at me, Shayne, in this is, and I had to just laugh when I saw this the first time, was the Rodman 48-hour vacation to Vegas, right? But the thing that I want to talk about on this is Phil Jackson a little bit, and tie this into coaching players today. What is fair? I guess, let me ask you this: is fair always equal? What is fair? Because in this case, Rodman, being a bit of a loose cannon, to put it nicely, had to have a couple days in Vegas just to get focused, I guess. But and obviously, and maybe he would have, but he didn't tell Steve Kerr to go to the Bahamas for a couple days to unwind. Now maybe had Steve Kerr come to him and asked for that, maybe he would have done that. My point is, when we coach, it's tough to treat every kid exactly the same because you're dealing with individual personalities. But then what crosses lines? That got me thinking in terms of, how do you manage that to where you're taking care of the needs? In all honesty here, jokes aside, you're trying to meet the needs of your athletes, right? Individually. But then how does that, I guess, coexist with being fair to the entire group?
Well, that's certainly a dynamic question there, and I'm the first to admit you have always been better in coaching than me at managing egos. I don't have a lot of patience for egos, and that's something I've really tried to work on. I've identified that in professional development throughout my career as something I want to try to relate to a little bit more. I feel like I have good relationships with a lot of different people. But you know, my first instinct when you like see the Dennis Rodman thing is I tell that cat to take a hike. I don't care who he is. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
that's out. And I'm not saying that was the best thing at all. I guess the first thing I would throw to you, I have about 2-3 different things in my notes on this, but the first thing I would throw back to you is when it comes to managing egos, because that's what we're really talking about here when we talk about fair, isn't it? In terms of you're going to deal with a lot of different types of people. And if to put it on a high school thing, it might be someone this is the most important thing in their life and they'll be there every day, all day, where some people be like, I kind of play, but hey, I've also got tickets to go Kings Island, or hey, you know, my family's going to go on a weekend vacation, or hey, over the holidays we may do this or this. You know, where do you find that ability? Because it's something you've always done real well to be able to separate. And I guess that's the second part. I'll even go ahead and combine another thing. How much do you think the deeper you get into your career and the more successful you've been to where you feel like you have a little bit more of a foundation to stand on, do you think that's increased your ability to have a little bit more flexibility to do some of these dynamic things?
Well, yeah, I'm sure the longer you're in this, probably you do develop that flexibility. I'll come back to that maybe in a few minutes. But to talk on your other point there about how do you manage that? I guess one thing I've always tried to pay attention to is how you try to keep a finger on the pulse of your team, I guess, in the sense of how's my team as a whole going to feel about this decision, you know, to help one player. So you take the Rodman situation again. This is an extreme situation, obviously, with a professional team. So it's not the same as we deal with in high school. But you know, I have a feeling probably Phil Jackson felt like, look, these guys know Dennis Rodman can help us win a championship. That's all these guys care about. This is our last go around at this. They want to win a championship. These guys all know Rodman's nuts. They know we got to have him to win it. I don't think they're going to get too shook up about me trying to do whatever I got to do to keep this guy's head on at least a little bit straight here for the rest of this season. So I think he probably had a pretty good – I feel like Phil Jackson was kind of like a genius at understanding how the entire group felt, understanding individual personalities and as a whole how the entire group would react. And I think you have to do that at the high school level even a little bit. Like, you know, some guys have earned a little equity probably in, you know, their attitude, their effort, their commitment to, you know, if something rough happens, to maybe try to reach out and help them out. And I think the team probably understands that. Like, I'll give you an example. I listened to a podcast the other day, and a really well-respected Division II college coach. I listened to a podcast with him, and he made a comment that I thought was, I mean, this was really surprising. I hadn't heard this before, I guess. He said he tells his players at the beginning of the season, you're going to practice somewhere around 70 times. We're going to have about 70 practices. He says about 50 of those times, you're not going to feel like being here. You're either going to be hurt, you're either going to be tired, something else is on your mind, and I'm going to expect you to show up and give me whatever you can give me those 50 times. He goes, but there might be one day out of 70 where your day is so bad that you just need a day off. Maybe something happened at home with mom and dad, girlfriend break up with you, just something that was so bad that you're like, Coach, I just can't be there today. I'm not mentally invested, physically invested. And you know, he told his team, he goes, if you give me those 50 days where you show up and do your best when you don't feel like it, I'll give you that one. You know, and I thought that was interesting because I've never thought of it that way. You know, he basically tells his players at the beginning of the year, I'll give you that one day. So I think don't you feel like, again, this goes back a little bit to developing those relationships we talked about so that you can figure out how to handle each individual situation?
I do. Let me give another side of this though, because again, there's part of me, and again, I understand the difference between high school and coaching Chicago Bulls. Going for 6 titles, 2 different things. What would you say to the part of Phil Jackson knew that he was done. He knew it was the final year, no matter what was going to happen. He knew he was done, and he kind of was a sellout and just kind of let things go. What happens if Utah? What happens if Jordan's shot goes in and out and Utah wins in 7? Is the narrative different when they lose? I mean, in terms of like, he let it get loose, he let it go. Don't you think winning? It goes back to that results driven thing. Don't you think winning sometimes makes things look really, really good? Or sometimes you do it the right way and losing makes it look bad. Don't you think sometimes the result kind of ends up making things look fair, unfair, whichever way you want to look at it in terms of the reality here? Because here's a guy that had won 5 championships already, kind of coaching with house money, isn't he? I would say the same thing in high school. I think sometimes what happens, it's very, very difficult. I know that there's a lot of decisions I've made that I think have been really, really good ones here in the last, say, 5 to 10 years that I don't think I could have made in my first 5 to 10 years, Matt, because I don't think I would have had confidence with my administration. I don't think I would have had just the foundation to stand behind those things and believe in them and sell them to parents and so forth. So I do think a lot of times these things come with a little bit of longevity. They come with a little bit of success to where you form that foundation. So if you're a young coach listening, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have rules. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have foundation pieces in your program. It just means that you have to be a little bit more open-minded in terms of adjusting those as time goes on. Is that a fair way to say it?
I definitely think winning, we joke all the time, is the best medicine, right? It's a cure-all. I mean,
Sure.
Everybody's going to remember that particular team differently because they did finish it off to win a championship. We've probably coached teams. I mean, if you think about it, I've had teams that I felt like the team chemistry was a little bit fragile at times, but because we won, it just sort of stayed okay. I've joked before with some of my assistant coaches and said, had we lost 3 in a row at any point this season, things could have went south fast.
Right.
But because we won, it's sort of kept the peace a little bit. I can't help but think of the word discipline a little bit when you start looking at these coaching decisions too. Now, we didn't see, like, Rodman misses a practice later on, to go to the WWE, that whatever that was.
I don't.
I mean, it's just too much for me not to laugh at, man. I just can't get past it. But we didn't, obviously there didn't appear to be any discipline there at that point. Maybe like it was just too far gone at that point, and they're just trying to win and get through it. But when I think about coaches, one of the toughest things, I think, don't you agree, is how do you discipline certain infractions or certain things that happen? And I think sometimes as a coach, when we discipline, or this could be a teacher in the classroom or a principal or whatever, why do we discipline? Why do we hand out the consequence we hand out? This is something that somebody had brought up to me a while back, and I got to thinking about it. I mean, do we discipline? When we discipline, do we do it for the right reasons? I think on its most simplistic base, the reason you discipline is to stop behavior, right? To correct behavior and to stop it from happening again. If you discipline your child, you're doing it in hopes that he or she won't do it again, right? Same thing with athletes. So do we always discipline with that in mind, or do sometimes we discipline for appearances or what we think makes our program look good? Like for instance, I used this example one time when I was talking about this to another coach when we got to talking, and I said, it's kind of like if my son is in the garage with me and we're working and he says a bad word. It's just me and him in there. He says a bad word. Well, if that would happen, thank goodness it hasn't yet. If that would happen, I would pull him aside and say, whoa, Where, first of all, where'd you come up with that at, and why would you use that? And here's what this means, and here's why it's bad. And you would use it as a teaching moment, right? But if he did it in the aisle at Walmart and there was like 5 people standing around, you'd feel like jerking him up and beating him and said, and you would be doing that. Wouldn't you partly be doing that out of embarrassment, right? You would partly be doing that
no question.
to, hey, ladies, I'm really a good parent. Look at me. I'm going to beat my son for saying this in the aisle at Walmart. So I think it's one of those deals where with discipline as a coach, you have to make sure you're disciplined for the right reasons. When you look at this Bulls situation, had he disciplined Rodman in a couple of those situations, he would have also been punishing all the other guys on the team, because it probably would have cost them the opportunity to go for a championship. So that's a tough thing for me as a coach sometimes, because I think if I discipline this kid in a certain way, I'm also punishing these guys over here. And am I doing it to make myself look like, hey, I'm in control and I'm a good coach and I have discipline, or am I doing it truly for the right reasons?
Well, there's a lot of dynamic there, and I honestly think about every situation is different. First of all, with a parent, it's your kids, and you're worried about the upbringing of your kids. You don't feel like you're helping raise the neighbors or your friends' kids or the different things, throughout. Then you go into the classroom. There's certain times you can discipline a classroom where everyone would get a discipline, a punishment that might go together. And I that's not for me. I don't do a lot of that stuff. But then when you come to a situation where like they're performing, it's their grade, and their grade doesn't really have to be impacted by a lot of the other things. Well, now all of a sudden when you get to a team, you make an interesting point, because the team, that can impact results in terms of everybody involved. I guess all I would say to this, I think the answer you're giving in today's professional development that I sit through, I think most administrators would agree with you 100%. They would talk about, our goal is to not remove kids from here, not to do this. It's to try to improve the behavior or to correct the behavior. The only problem I have with that sometimes is what I would argue in terms of being a teacher that might be in charge of, anywhere from 140 to 165, 70 kids a day, is I don't always put a disciplinary action out there just to correct that particular person's behavior. I do it as a way to keep structure throughout the entire student body. Same way with coaching. I don't always look to say, well, if so-and-so has just continuously been late or has done this or has gotten in trouble in school or whatever it might be, there's a time that I feel like I have to discipline in terms of keeping structure in terms of the whole program. That's the point I was saying about, I thought it was a scary situation for Phil Jackson being in his final year, because he understood, Matt, that beyond one more playoff run, beyond one more final, I don't care what Dennis Rodman does. I don't care what anybody does. You know what I'm saying? On the Bulls, I'm going to go find my next job. And I think I see that in high school coaches sometimes. I think it's a very scary situation sometimes when high school coaches, when he or she kind of know that they're done. I always think that's a bad situation to be in, because I don't think you truly coach for program. I mean, if you're being honest, there's probably a little bit of a self-conscious that comes through, isn't there, that starts to make decisions based on right now in terms of not paying forward. So I guess the thing I would say is, yes, I want to correct that behavior, and I want to work with those student athletes to do that. But at the same time, do you see where I'm coming from when I talk about wanting to also set a tone in terms of what is the expectation, what is the standard in this classroom, what is the standard on this team in terms of how we act, during a lecture, on how we act during a test, or in competition, how we act toward umpires, how we act toward opposing, opponents and opposing coaches, how we act towards teammates, and so forth, to the point of where you want to set that standard and make sure that you are following through. Because if not, I've always feared that you can become a little fake, can't you, as a coach? A lot of times, these student athletes are looking at you to see how you handle it. And to me, you become a little bit of a fake when you don't always follow through, and maybe sometimes put, for lack of a better term, winning ahead of some of those actions. that make sense?
Right. I think that, what you're saying is when you discipline somebody to prevent the behavior, sometimes you discipline them to prevent the behavior from everybody else, though.
Yes.
I mean, that's sort of the same thing. You're still doing it to prevent the behavior from happening again.
Right.
But it's because sometimes a punishment is necessary, a consequence is necessary. That's just the way it is. And I think sometimes, again, as a coach, I think you have to know your players. You have to know the ones that the only way you're going to get through to them is unfortunately a consequence. Some of them you're going to be able to sit down and talk to them and like I said, use it as a teachable moment. But interesting topic. One of which we could probably keep going on, but I'm going to jump ahead to another one. We said this was random topic night, so it's not like we can really segue into these. Sometimes you just jump into the next one. One thing that's come up, and it's always fascinated me, is the idea of like blowouts or the score being ran up or running up the score, whatever. The idea of mercy rules, right? In some sports, we have the sport you coach in baseball, correct? We have a mercy rule, a 10-run rule, or whatever it is after 5 innings.
Thank goodness.
Well, and we recently in Ohio, at least, there's been some rules put in place to help with football and basketball with some running clock during certain situations. There's a lot of different angles we can take on this. One, I think some people would tell you it's discouraging that we have to legislate ethics, right? We shouldn't have to have mercy rules and things like that if coaches handle things the right way. I don't know if I completely agree with that, because I think sometimes as a coach, we've all been in situations where we're either on the bad end of a score, and I know I've been on the bad end of a score before where I didn't think I was getting the coach was running it up on me. I was just thinking that we weren't good enough, and I've been on the other end where I'm sitting over there thinking, how do I keep this score manageable or under control? You're in a basketball game and you're up 40 points and the other team's coming down and shooting every 6 seconds and you don't know quite how to handle your players because you've got your subs in a game and they work hard and you want them to be able to play. But yet, if you end up winning 105-50, people are going to say, oh, they ran the score, so there's a lot of dynamics to this, Shane. One of the questions that came up was whose job is it to throw in the towel first? In other words, is it the team that's winning? Is it their job to say, call off the dog, so to speak? Or is it the team that's losing? Is it their job to kind of call it off in hopes that the other coach will reciprocate? Whose job is it to do that? It probably depends on the sport a little bit, I would think. But, I guess overall, just what's your opinion on that part of it?
Well, there's no doubt. There's no doubt for me that it's the job of the adults involved, being the coaches, to try to make sure that we understand that at our level, at the high school level, there's still an education involved, right? It's still a situation where I say it all the time on these podcast shows I do. We're not the college level making thousands or the professional making millions. So again, there has to be an understanding of that. So it's the coaches collectively to make sure that the game is still being playing proper, to make sure that you're not just purposely maybe pouring it on. Does that mean subbing a little bit? Does that mean, not pressing? Does that mean, not throwing the football downfield, whatever it might be? What I find fascinating about this, Matt, in my notes is, a volleyball coach never deals with this, because if they beat someone 25-1, well, the rule says they had to get 25, right? So,
right.
So what we're really talking about here is some time sports, or some sports such as baseball, softball, where there's an inning limit or so forth. This is where I've talked so much about the first month here on expanding the zone. I'm a huge fan of these mercy rules. And I'll be honest, I didn't think I would be. Like, I've been on both sides of this. I've been in a situation where I won a baseball game like 33-1. I've lost the baseball game 31-1. I once lost to a team like 28-2 in the first round, and then beat that team 2-1 in the second half of the year. Because in a sport like baseball, the pitching might have just been out of whack one night, where the next night you had your best. I mean, it's a weird situation. But like, what I find is coaches, players, fans, referee, umpire, whatever it might be, who's benefiting from these situations once they get late? What am I missing here, Matt, in terms of, if someone's up 16-2 in the fourth inning, the game's probably over. If a soccer team's up 10-0 at halftime, I don't know how much the second half, you would want played. It's a situation in terms of basketball. If someone's up 28 with 3 minutes to go, what good is happening in the last 3 minutes? So I guess that's where I've changed my views on this. Where when I was a lot younger, I couldn't wrap my mind around being accepting of some of these. But as I get older and I start to wear the hats of different things within sports, I guess the mercy rules make total sense to me. Tell me I'm wrong there, or tell me why I'm right.
Well, I agree. I think the mercy rules are important. They're necessary for sure. I just think they are. I think the dynamic that intrigues me in this particular subject area is the different sports. Like for instance, take football for a minute. I was at a football game one night where a team was up 40-6. It was like 40-6 with 3 minutes left or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the team with 40 put their subs in. The team with 6 kept their starters in. Well, in a sport like football, what's that do now? You've got an 18-year-old linebacker kicking the crap out of a freshman tailback that just came in the game with the nice clean uniform or whatever, because he's going to get 3 minutes here. So in football, I look at football and I think, I don't know, man. Is it the team that's winning? Is it their job to call off the dogs, or is it the team that's not? That's where, like you said, coaches have to be adults and mutually work together on this.
Especially in that sport, sure.
Yeah, because
sure.
that sport, in basketball, your pride gets hurt. In football, your body gets hurt. You have injuries, and that's where you get in that. The sports like baseball, I mean, to me, that would be so uncomfortable in baseball, trying to figure out a way to, because ultimately they got to get you out. You told me a story one time, you should share with people, where you had a guy lead off third. Do you remember that story in a game where you were winning like 30-1 and you told the guy to like fall down, like you were doing everything you could do?
We weren't falling down at all. We were simply going to take a lead off a little bit and see if the pitcher would lift his knee and throw to third base. Well, you know what happens? He threw over to third base and threw it away.
Threw it over the fence or whatever.
Now we're standing there on third base. We still didn't go. And like you said, there's a sense of becoming uncomfortable. Here's another part of coaching that when I was young, my ego got in the way, and I didn't understand enough, Matt, in terms of we would be down like 7-1, 8-1, 9-1, and those games were over. And my ego didn't want my kids to lose 15, 16, 17, 18, 1. And what I did was sometimes I would eat pitching, just trying to stay competitive. And then all of a sudden you get beat by 1 or 2 the next 2 nights. Where that other example I told you happened later in my career, where I understood what I had to do. I huddled my kids several times, said, look, I know this is hard. You got to trust me. This is going to pay off. And we won, including a doubleheader. We won 4 games in the next 3 days. So it was a situation where every sport is so dynamic. I guess what I would say is, back the argument of, well, there's a lot of younger kids, or there's a lot of subs that want to play and they deserve to play. Well, that argument I think sailed like a decade ago, because when we were growing up, the kids that were on the bench in these sports, they were your varsity bench players. Am I wrong at most schools? And maybe it's a little different at the bigger schools. I don't know. I know in our league, in the schools our size, and where the little league programs have kind of led to junior high numbers going down and high school numbers going down, these kids that are coming in the fourth quarter on a football Friday night, if I wanted to watch them play, I'd come back tomorrow morning, right? Because they're probably the JV kids. It's not like you're getting or in basketball, they're kids that just probably played in the JV game. So my argument even to that is, there's not even a room for kids to get playing time in terms of varsity subs. You see where I'm coming from there? I think that's a very outdated argument.
I think sometimes where I would disagree with that is like in the sport of basketball, possibly a senior who comes to practice every day, busts his butt, tries to do whatever he can for the team. I had a senior a few years ago hit a shot with about 6 seconds left to put us over 100. Okay. And the other coach was steamed. Now, look, did I want to reach out there and grab that kid and say, no, don't take that shot? I did. But you know what? Before I knew it, he'd let it go. And, after the game, I thought to myself, that was that kid's shining moment. I mean, think about that. This kid set the bench all year. When I'm saying a senior here, I'm talking about somebody who never played. Okay. He set the bench all season long. He scored about a total of 5 points all year. And for the rest of his life, he's going to remember that three he knocked down. Now, is that rubbing salt in the other team's wound? I don't know. That senior's my kid, my guy, and I'm going to protect him, and I'm going to, hopefully allow him to have his moment, I guess, so to speak. Again, sportsmanship's important, and I don't want to sacrifice that. But in that situation, I didn't feel like we were, because I think a lot of times, if you're on the losing side of that, you got to be, and I don't want to spend all day on this topic, but if you're on the losing side, you have to also have sportsmanship in mind. Like I used the football example, right? But also basketball, you'll see this all the time. A team will sub, and then that team that's down 25-30 with 2 minutes left, they pick up in a full court press with their starters because we're going to try to make this score look like it was 15 or 14 instead of 25. Is that the spirit of that? I don't think it is. I feel like if I'm on the losing end and a coach is doing me a favor by not embarrassing me any further, then my kids are going to drop back and play straight man. Okay?
Don't you think the final score is a weird dynamic in sports?
It's way overblown.
We get it wrapped up into seeding and different things of, hey, we only lost by such and such to this team these two times.
Have you ever, in all honesty, Shane, have you ever felt better in basketball? Like, man, we only got beat by 17 tonight instead of 31. That doesn't make me feel better. To me, I have never gotten wrapped up in that. And I have never, quite frankly, probably more than once or twice in my 20 years, really thought somebody was trying to run it up on me or embarrass me. We had a situation one time where we were down about 30 something and a kid tried to throw one off the glass for a dunk to a teammate. Did I take a little bit of offense to that? I did. I didn't really say a whole lot about it, but in my mind, it bothered me. But again, that's a high school kid maybe making a decision that he shouldn't have been making at that time.
And for all you know, he would have done that if he was up 8.
Right. Well, yeah. And I, so I'm not going to hold that against the coach because I know firsthand sometimes your kids do things you wish they didn't. But yeah, it's interesting. I agree on the mercy rule, though. I mean, not only do I think we need mercy rules, I'm not so sure we don't need more. I'm not so sure that, like you said, that 28-point basketball game with 2 minutes left, nothing good's happening at the end of that game. So do we need a situation to keep that clock running even more, to just gracefully exit the stage left?
It goes back to what we're talking about. Ultimately, it is the adult's job to make sure nothing happens. But what I've always argued is, hey, how about we put some rules in place that kind of serve as some tools to help us? One thing I'm dying – I almost cut in earlier. There's something I've been dying to ask you here, Matt, in terms of confidence of athletes. There's a thing. It goes back to the motivation, I guess, a little bit, but I want to talk about it more in terms of just maybe looking at confidence versus being arrogant, cocky, whatever word you want to use. I think of the great Kobe Bryant. There was a quote. I think we had that there in our pre-show. If you want to put it up for people on YouTube, there's a quote from Kobe Bryant, and Kobe was a guy that, obviously he had attention to detail and he did certain things. If you're watching this here on YouTube, you can see it. I'll go ahead and read it for those of you listening to us as a podcast. It says, "I can't relate to lazy people. We don't speak the same language. I don't understand you. I don't want to understand you." And to me, gosh, you talk about a powerful message there. This is a situation of someone who did what he ended up doing better than most, arguably better than anybody other than maybe one or two in the history of the game. And Matt, I guess I read that quote and I think of what we talked earlier about motivation. And then I think of how much does this hurt us in our everyday lives or in our everyday job place or in our role on a team, because what happens is most people probably aren't going to have that same type of drive. So I think what happens is you get in a situation where I think this leads to a lot of changing. I think this leads to a lot of people changing jobs as many times as they do. At the high school level, we've talked about transferring. It's very common in today's time to, maybe see a kid go through, two, maybe three high schools. Nothing to see them be on two, three different AAU teams, or a young lady be on two, three different club teams throughout. And I think what happens sometimes is the dynamics of the way little leagues change, and maybe this is maybe a topic I'll save a little bit for our little league show coming up here soon. But what happens is, by the time some of these people and some of these families grow up in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, it's almost like they're looking for people like them. I mean, like, man, I've tried to donate time and money to volleyball here, and no one cares about it. Or I tried to, get in the weight room and lead weightlifting for 2 or 3 years, and we're still only getting 8 or 9 people here. Man, I want to go somewhere where people have the same passion I have about weightlifting. And if when I kind of read Kobe's quote there, it's people are going to look for people like them to work with. Is that not right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Nick Saban that basically said the same thing: is you're going to associate with people who sort of have the same drive and ambition and goals that you do. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a driven person who wants to be successful day in, day out, you get up in the morning, you say, I need to physically take care of myself. I'm going to exercise. I need to mentally take care of myself. I'm going to read. When I get to work, I want to give my very best effort. If you're driven that way, you're most likely not hanging out with people to just sit around and watch TV on the couch all day and eat potato chips and have no drive whatsoever. Those two people can't really mesh, because if you think about it, the person that's highly driven, that lazy person's going to drive them nuts, right? But that lazy person, they're not going to want to hang out with that person that's driven either, because it's like, man, that dude needs to chill out. He's bothering me. So it goes both ways. You are naturally going to gravitate. If I told you right now, take a pencil, write down 5 names of the people you spend the majority of your time with, I almost bet you any amount of money those 5 people are driven to whatever level you are. They match your expectations of how you should sort of live your life and do what you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't spend your time with them. And so I think you naturally gravitate toward that. Back to the confidence versus cockiness, the one thing I would say, that the question I always ask myself is it real? Is it a real confidence? Is it made up? Is it for show? Because I've seen kids over the years act confident, and it's a show. It's a show to cover up insecurity, quite honestly. And you see that a lot. And when you go look at guys like Kobe, or you look at guys like Jordan here in this Last Dance, it was obviously a real thing. It was a true confidence that probably was cockiness at times. But again, I think the other thing with cockiness is confidence that you let out, that you have to talk about, that you have to show. I think confidence is more of an internal thing. Does that make sense? Confidence is more of what's inside you, where cockiness is more of what's coming out of your mouth or your body language or whatever else. I always respected Jordan and Kobe and those guys, and for the most part, LeBron and some of these guys, where most of the time what comes out of their mouth is what should come out of your mouth. It's usually classy, respecting the game, that type of thing. Everybody has their moments, right? But on the inside, and you saw it come out in this documentary, what's on the inside is cocky. It's it's crazy confident, right? Borderline cocky, because again, though, it's like we talked about earlier. You can't be the player those guys are if you don't have that level of confidence. If you can't get yourself to that place, then you can't play at that level.
Well, what drives me, what fascinates me about this, I guess, is the drive in these particular players. When I think of a Kobe Bryant, I think of a Michael Jordan. The whole time I'm watching The Last Dance, I'm thinking to myself, Matt, everybody in the NBA was 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", right?
Right.
They could all jump. They could all play. They're all, better than the top 1% in the world. There has to be more to it than just that physical ability. I think there's 2 types of athletes that come, and I can think of of kids vividly that I've coached that, one of the best players I've ever coached in baseball. I can remember having him as a student in junior high. And every time we would test, Matt, he would come up to my desk. You just knew he was coming like 10 times a test, right? He was coming up there, and he wanted to know on the end, Mr. Combs, right here, is this, you think I've got enough here to get the full credit? You think I've got full credit? So then I would have to joke with him in terms of, we're not doing this. You're going to prepare for the test. So I would allot him one trip to my desk, and I would tell him, if you're coming up, you better make it a good one. But he was that obsessed.
It's like trips to the mail, man. If you come up twice, you got to take the picture out.
And it was one of those where he was obsessed. He had to get 100. That 96 wasn't good enough. So I respected that about him. But what's so funny about it is I fast forward 3-4 years later, he became the best player probably I've ever coached on the baseball diamond. But he lacked a little bit of confidence. As funny as that sounds, right? In terms of
right.
of his ability. I go the other side, though. I can also think of things like on the golf course. I'll see these athletes that will almost build in an excuse, Matt, in case they fail. Right. So it's that golfer who, hey, I'm going to try this flop shot, or I'm going to try this incredible shot through this window or whatever, so that I almost have a built-in excuse in case I do fail. This was why. And I see that a lot. I see that with some crazy talent. It's I think we all have examples, don't we, of where we coach a 5 out of 10 and their mind kind of goes to 7 or 8, where sometimes we coach those 6 or 7s that just kind of perform at a 5 because they just don't have that same drive or so forth. I guess that's probably where I fall on that particular thing. I mean, do you see what I'm saying in terms of there has to be something more than just physical ability there?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think confidence is probably the number one thing in terms of athletic success, because so much of the physical stuff typically evens out or whatever, and a lot of times it comes down to that mental side. You mentioned the word drive, and I want to lead into my next topic here with that. When I watched this Last Dance, probably the number one thing that jumped out at me, and I got to give credit to our pastor of our church, who I think at times listens to our show, because he gave us some feedback, but he made a comment in his sermon the other day. He actually referenced Jordan in this documentary and said one of the things that jumped out at him was, all these years later, Jordan seems almost unfulfilled or dissatisfied, like can't be at peace with the career that he's had. And I noticed that a little bit too. And you talk about that drive, Shayne. Sometimes that drive brings out the best of us and the worst of us all at the same time. Sometimes what makes us great makes us struggle, or makes us be at our worst at times too. I think that, when you look at this thing with Jordan, and you see now how driven he was to be the best. Like, it just wasn't acceptable to be anything less than the best team, the best player in the world. He still to this day he is concerned about the comparisons of who the best is. I mean, if you think about it, the career he had and what he accomplished, why would he sit around and worry about if he's better than LeBron or if he's considered better than Kobe? You would think now, if he was living in the present, he would be worried about being compared to Mark Cuban, and am I better than him? Right. Because, but he's still concerned about his legacy. And I guess my point to all that is that obsession to be the best, it can also go the other way and really hurt you when it doesn't allow you to enjoy what you've accomplished when it's all said and done. It doesn't allow you to ever reach a point of, I'm using the word satisfaction not as a negative, but when it's all said and done, being able to look back and say, hey, I did my best and we accomplished something really good. It's almost, you hear things like comparisons can steal your joy, if you live in the world of comparing yourself to others. And it's almost like that comparison that Jordan used to motivate himself now haunts him a little bit, and he's still worried about his legacy and how he appears in people's eyes. it was just an interesting dynamic to me, and it made me think that, you know, a lot of times what makes us the best we can be also can be our own worst enemy, and make us the worst that we can be at times too.
I think I've always tried to get on myself about, I've said one of my biggest attributes is how much, you know, I am, I guess for lack of a better term, I have that drive to be successful. But the problem is I don't really enjoy success enough. And that's something, again, I tried to really work on as I've identified things in professional development, because I think I'm a person, Matt, that, and I don't know if this is true for you, that sometimes I see winning as a relief, where I fear losing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of times, even as a high school athlete, what would drive my workouts was different things. And again, when you talk personal life, there's a lot of things that maybe certain friendships didn't go the same. You know, if I didn't have the same drive in a particular sport, but I did in this sport, or whatever it might be, but there was a sense of, I fear. Yeah, I remember the great Pistol Pete used to say he would sit in church or whatever and look up at the wall and count the clock, right? Count the minutes, because he was afraid that if I'm sitting, you know, here, if I'm walking through the grocery store with my mom for 45 minutes, you know, what if someone else is out there working those 45 minutes? You see what I'm saying? So it's one of those things.
It is. It's almost like you're driven by the fear of failure.
Yes.
Way more than you're driven by the joy of victory. And I think,
And if you allow yourself to do it, can you ever turn that switch off?
it's hard, because I know for me, it is almost probably ended my coaching career in a couple of situations where, because the work I put in ends up being way more out of fear that somebody will better us than it does of, hey, I want to be successful and I want our team. So again, I've always, I mean, look, you are who you are. Okay. I wish I wasn't this way, but I hate losing more than I love winning. And that's, if I ever had advice for a young coach, it would probably be, try not to be that way. Try to love winning more than anything else, and be able to let the losing go. But it definitely, when you're like that, what happens is you're always on to what's next. And I think sometimes that can be good because you live in the present, but sometimes it can be bad because you don't step back and enjoy. In other words, you know, I can remember when I first started out coaching, I thought, man, if we could just win a league championship, man, I'd be happiest dude around if we'd win a league. And then, well, then if we could just win a district championship, and then if we could just accomplish this, and if we could just accomplish this, you never enjoy what you did because you're always thinking about what's next, right? What's the next thing I've got to do? Mm-hmm. So again, if you don't have that attitude, though, you get lazy sometimes and complacent. So it's a fine line. Again, you have to have that what's next attitude, but I think you have to reward yourself too. And the older I get, I do try to do that. I do try to step back after a season, look back on it, try to enjoy it a little bit, but it's hard. It's hard when you're in the moment because you're in the grind. You're in the day-to-day grind of it.
And it's unhealthy. You know, it really is. Like, you know, you mentioned Coach Saban earlier, the 76ers have used it a little bit or whatever, that term, the process, right? You know, in terms of the process is something that I've tried to really buy into, because I understand what you're saying. It's one of those things where I can remember after we won our second district title, people be like, hey, is that kind of cool to sit around and think about that a little bit? And I got to thinking to myself a little bit, if I'm being honest, I think about the ninth inning in the regional more when we lost to the eventual state champion than I did the success that led to that game. You see what I'm saying? It's one of those things where, so what I've tried to do, the advice I would give to young coaches is I've tried to truly invest in the process. And if you invest in the process, I think you can add it up. I remember telling a young man a couple years ago, one of the best hitters that's ever played for him. He's gone on to play college ball now. He's going to be going in, unfortunately not getting a chance to play this particular year, but you know, in a career in the NAIA level, he's one of the best hitters I ever coached. And I remember he was so obsessed with numbers because of how hard he worked at it. Eventually, the message I tried to give to him was trust the process, trust all your tee work, trust all your cuts, to the point where if you do that and you never giving it bat away, what we'll do is we'll sit down and we'll add it all up at the end of the year and see what it comes to. So yeah, I guess I had one more thing for you, Matt. I know we're running long this time, but there's one thing I had to throw at you here in terms of these random thoughts tonight is knowledge. Do you feel like we are losing a huge opportunity in today's time by the time we get to the high school level with film and some different things, because here's something that was on my mind today in preparation for the show. If I go down and I watch a little league game, I don't care what the sport is, doesn't knowledge have a lot to do with that 6, 7, 8-year-old being better? You know what I mean? If the kid understands the rules of how to run the bases, he or she on a baseball, softball field, or a basketball player, the instincts or whatever it might be, then as they start to get a little bit older, we start to use the term like feel of the game and so forth. But my point is, knowledge of the game separates sometimes kids that might be even athletically. We say all the time that this kid might be faster on the bases, but this kid's a better base runner. You see what I'm saying? So
Right.
do you feel like we're losing in this time of COVID-19 and so forth, where we're trying to communicate with kids through video and some different things? Don't you think there's a whole thing there today's generation hasn't tapped into nearly enough in terms of film work and video work and trying to utilize some of those things to just better themselves?
I don't think there's any question that we've got to get creative in how we teach today's athletes. I see it with my own son, who's 8 years old, and when I was his age, or maybe just a hair older, I would sit down and watch like an entire Cincinnati Reds baseball game. Okay. Now, we talked about it last week. They weren't on all the time, right? So when they were on, it was sort of like a treat or whatever, I get. But I learned baseball. I learned the rules of baseball by watching it on TV and by playing wiffle ball in the backyard. Probably the two ways I learned it. I don't remember my coach ever really having to go over rules. I'm sure they did have to teach us a few things, but I never, you know what I mean? I learned those things watching. Well, I know my son's not going to sit down and watch a whole Reds game. So what I have to do now is try to utilize YouTube and make him watch, like, hey, check this out. Watch this guy. Watch, like, he loves Steph Curry, right? So I'll find like a clip of like 10 minutes of Steph Curry doing some things, and I might be able to get him to watch 10 minutes of that. I'm not going to get him to watch right now on a whole Golden State Houston Rocket game. He's not going to sit down and do that. On YouTube one day, I made him watch, this is how old I am, I made him during breakfast watch an episode of the Baseball Bunch. You remember the Baseball Bunch with Johnny Bench, right? Or who was it? Yeah, was it Johnny Bench or
Johnny Bench was awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Mike Schmidt was the guest or something that day. It was great, man. I loved it. I think he thought this is terrible, but in all honesty, we have to come to their level, and their level is an instant level where they have information at their fingertips. And if you notice, they don't watch 2 hours of information. They watch little 5-minute videos. And I think we have to do what we can do as coaches to teach that way. We have to use shorter clips. We have to use, and with like a huddle with our film work we do on it, sending kids a quick 2-minute highlight clip. Hey, here's what, here's some footwork I'd like to see you work on. I can remember back years ago where my assistant coach, Jeff Miller, would give guys a DVD of just nothing but ball screens, 25 minutes of different NBA players using ball screens. So really, he was sort of ahead of the curve. Now you would do that digitally, right? You could send that via, a message on the phone or whatever. But no, I agree with you. I think we have to get creative because kids are learning the game differently than they used to.
Well, and my final thought for this week in terms of, how long do you let things go, or how far do you let things go, or what creativity levels do we need? I guess that makes total sense to me because, you no longer can always say, go home and watch all 22 games, as a basketball, or like we tape our baseball games. We get made fun of all the time for that, but we tape our baseball games. And the idea is go home and watch your at-bats.
Right.
Find your 4 at-bats tonight and go home and watch them, because I know we play every night or whatever. But that makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess my final thought for this, Matt, always comes back to that word that I seem to in my final thoughts every time we do one of these expanding the zones. And that's that compromise. You've got to figure out a way to take what's always worked for you, but you have to continue to drive forward and start to figure out, how does that relate to today? What has worked so well that has been able to stand the test of time? And then what can I blend in today's time to make it a little bit better? So I certainly don't want to cut you off here. Like I said, I know we've gone a little longer this time, but man, we kind of knew we might because of how passionate we are about these. What, is there something on your notes, maybe a bullet point we didn't get to, or just a final thought in terms of what you think coaches and leaders listening here this evening need to take from this show?
No, I have nothing else. I think we got through everything. I know we went a little long, but I had fun with this show, Shayne. These are topics that we enjoy. You know, you and I might just be driving in the car some days and talk these things out. All we're doing now is recording it. But like, you know, hopefully, and I honestly hope that maybe a coach hears some of this stuff or a player hears some of this stuff and it can help. I know since I started listening to podcasts a couple years ago during my commute, how much I've learned. I have learned so much listening to other coaches talk over the last 2 years that I hope that we can do the same for somebody else. So that's kind of what this show is all about. I enjoyed it, and between now and next week, we'll figure out what we're going to do next.
Well, we will, and we'll keep watching the real world of sports and see what it drives us. We'll watch our fan feedback, you know, in terms of our emails, our direct messages. Again, you can follow us through social media. You can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter. Just look for the SVC Sports Zone, and that's going to take you wherever you need to go. Same way on YouTube, some different things that you might get from watching us rather than listening to us. You can look that up. That's SVC Sports Zone. Shayne, if you want to email, it's admin1@svcsportszone.com. I know a lot of you have done that. I've enjoyed those. So on that note, Matt, I know we're excited. We have ideas for Little League shows, rules of the game. I know we did the State of the Game of baseball. I know a lot of people are eager for our State of the Game basketball. That'll be coming just slightly down the road a little bit, but we're getting closer and closer to that. And if you have an idea for a show, let us know. So again, a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Listen to this episode 7. We'll be back before you know it with episode 8, and I look forward to talking some coaching topics and overall leadership with you. So on that note, we'll get on out of here this time, and we thank everybody for listening.